Good morning, everyone. It's Drewe here from Market Dojo. Many thanks for joining, and I'm with my colleague here, Adam Collins.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. We're looking forward to talking you through a very interesting topic here. We hear quite a lot when we obviously have these conversations with our clients and prospects, of course, and general contacts within the procurement industry of sourcing not being capable or suitable for my categories. So we want to talk through today some of the unusual events that we've seen run through Market Dojo over the last 10 years, and also understand the kind of categories that perhaps you think may not be suitable. So yeah, really interested to see what we've got for you today.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is designed to be interactive. So please, as we're going through, you can use the tool to raise any questions. We'll do a couple of polls as we go through, just to hear some of your experiences. So very much, let's interact and hear your thoughts as well. So yeah, as Adam says, we're just going to be talking to you today about some of the more unusual categories that we've seen, just for a bit of fun, but also some real learnings and takeaways from these that hopefully you'll be able to follow for some of the categories that you yourselves look after. So just to begin then, the first thing we can look at is we have what we have ripped off the Breaking Bad series.
Like a chemistry lesson already.
A bit of a chemistry lesson, absolutely. A periodic chart. So in this case, it's of different savings percentages that our clients have seen across all sorts of different categories, from things like your obvious ones of office stationery to heating and ventilation equipment, to freight, to what we've got there, lighting and HR services. So a real range, and you can see some of the savings figures look quite astonishing, really, up in the sort of high 30s in some cases, and then you have others that might be down in just a few percent, where as we all know, there's a lot of spend that may not be addressable in certain categories. So this is a graphic that we can share with anyone if you're looking to put a business case together, or just get some benchmarks on how you're performing against some of the averages of our clients here. Then very, very happy to share that with everyone. So yeah, that's as I say, our chemistry lesson there, the periodic table with all different savings categories. Brilliant. Next up, so what we've really observed in the tool from doing the analysis is that we can do a full A to Z of spend categories within the tool. From which ones were tricky? I think Z was a difficult one. We had to kind of look at zebra print cartridges for cancer research on that one. X, I think that was Xerox. I don't think we've sourced too many X-rays or homes, sadly. But we've had all sorts of things. We've had nappies, we've had bottled water, we've had lifeguards. I think some of these Adam will go through later to give you a few takeaways. But something we have done with all this data is we have produced a set of top trump cards. If you all remember those from your youth, where you'd huddle around and try and win the complete deck by outranking your peers. And in our case, the top trumps are things like the auctionability of different categories, supply liquidity, the complexity, the savings. And so yeah, if you ever want a deck of the top trumps, just drop us a line. We'll get it out in the post to you. They're quite fun, and I'm sure one for all of the family to enjoy, no doubt. But on a more important level, it can give you a bit of a benchmark as to where we have seen some of the categories work well and not so well, for your own sort of information. So I guess this is our first stopping point to do a poll. So the first poll is going to be, what strange tender categories have you seen? So yeah, you can see there, if you look on the questions tab of the webinar portal there, you can just drop yourself a message there that will come through to us here, and we'll talk about these at the end. So please, any weird and wonderful spend categories you've seen either e-auctioned or e-sourced would be fantastic, and we can compare notes at the end. Oh, I see there's some coming through already. Excellent. Bulletproof glass there, fantastic. But we'll give you a bit of time. Please just drop your answers through as we go through. So the first one on our side that we've seen that's slightly unusual was in fact an auction for an Ed Sheeran hand-signed guitar, which I must admit is the first time we had encountered that. This was actually for a fantastic charity that were looking to encourage more youngsters getting into playing musical instruments and playing guitar in particular. And they got donated this guitar by Ed Sheeran for this tremendous cause, and decided to look at ways that they could maximize the revenue, the profits that they could get from selling it to the mass market. And so they came up with using an auction. It was someone we have actually worked with in the past, Jerry Thorogood, who had used our tool at Greco extensively, and came up with the idea of, well, why not use an eSourcing tool to put the guitar out to the market. And that's exactly what they did. And they had a number of bidders involved. They hosted the auction during a sort of charity dinner as well to raise further interest and profile. And in the end, I can't remember exactly how many bids they had, but you know, a good number of bids came in over a sort of several-day auction, and they got a very, very happy price out of it, selling price. So that was very interesting, and I suppose the takeaway we can all learn from in this one to take back to our procurement lives is that even in a tricky category where you don't think there's maybe much of a market, or certainly you've not identified a market yet, just through that graft and you know, holding the right conversations with the right people, you can build up that market of bidders to engage. And certainly this is something I used to do a lot in my previous life as a consultant. We would experience spend categories for the very first time with a client that we were running, you know, we were charged with running the project for, and we would have to go and create the supplier market. We didn't know who the suppliers were. We would go out and create that long list of suppliers using portals like, you know, obviously Google search, but trade associations and chambers of commerce in different countries if this was a global sourcing activity, word of mouth, of course, and really just opening up the supplier options to increase the competition and hence the results at the end. So you know, that's broadly what these guys had to do with the Ed Sheeran guitar, is go and create that market of bidders. The next category we have is another interesting one that worked really well. We had one of our partners out in Slovenia who wanted to buy a new car. And he did all the usual things of going around various dealerships and having those cringeworthy conversations with car salesmen as to, you know, what the best price is that they could achieve, trying to negotiate, you know, that free doormat that you seem to get with every new car purchase, and really he tried his hardest to secure you know, his desired car at the best price, but he struggled to get that extra negotiation with them. They just weren't really playing ball, and so he decided to take matters into his own hands using what he knows well, Market Dojo, through being a partner. He invited, I think, like half a dozen dealerships into the portal, into an auction, and got them competing against each other. And in his case, he actually set it up as a weighted auction, which, you know, a lot of our colleagues in public sector would know about, of using the quality evaluation of the solution and combining that with the price evaluation to give that sort of holistic, sort of total balanced scorecard for each bid. And the ranking of the auction was based on that overall assessment. And so it enabled him to compare and indeed negotiate in an auction with, you know, a Seat against an Audi, against a VW, against, I can't remember the last one, might have been a Ford. So even though there were various levels of quality going on, that was already considered in the whole weighting of the auction. And he got himself a fantastic result. He saved himself about 1,500 euros in that 37 minutes. All the dealers played ball. Not only that, they actually gave some really good feedback afterwards that they appreciated having that second bite of the cherry. In that, if he met with them face to face, he would just walk out of there and say, no, you know, that's the last I'd hear of him. But in this auction, they could put in their offer, see where they stood, and have that immediate ability to counteract. And they actually really appreciated that. So maybe one day soon we might be seeing automotive dojo come to market. So watch this space. But if any of you out there, looking to buy a new car, give us a call.
I'm interested just on that point, Nick, to understand that whole purchase process, how much weighting was put behind the test drive. I wonder whether that was 90% of it, and then the cost was the lesser element. But yeah, really interesting to see, and using it on a consumer level, which we also have another example of, which I think is coming up next too.
Absolutely. It's a good point on test drive, because that dovetails into something we'll cover later on some of the techniques and strategies for running these events. The next one is a very dear one to me, in that that is my house, and I say we, my family. So my wife was my key stakeholder, along with my architect, who had input into the evaluation of this tender online, and it was for a house extension. So I had my loft converted and I had a new kitchen installed, and the architect that I worked with, he had 4 preferred builders that he'd used repeatedly in and around Bristol, where I live, and he took the bid package out to those 4 bidders, and the quotes that we got back were just quite simply out of budget, and were threatening to kibosh the entire project. And so I did what I know well, which is to go out to market properly. I actually went out to 96 builders in Bristol, which is quite a lot. I obviously have a lot of spare time. And of those 96, I had 20 bids logged back as a result. And through that process, there were site inspections and meetings and that kind of thing to make sure that these suppliers were sort of meeting the right criteria. And the tender package itself was quite large. It was about 20 megabytes, so it was a bit too big to email around, hence why sharing it online through Market Dojo and running the whole process online was really effective. And I'm very pleased to say that as a result of running that tender online, we had shortlisted down to the top 3, and then further down to that final one for the selection. And the saving was about 33%. Compared to the 4 quotes, the best of the 4 quotes that we had through the architect. So that actually let us do the project and produce that nice photo there of the finished result. And it was a really good sort of conclusion. So again, it's just putting that procurement hat on, finding that market, creating that market, and putting them to the test, and just using the tool online to sort of centralize all that information and make the whole process more streamlined. In fact, I think I was actually sitting at eWorld, exhibiting at one of the eWorld conferences, and had my phone on the go with these bids coming in and questions coming in from different builders, and it was great. I could just get on with both things at the same time. And the next one, another personal favorite. This is an auction we did on professional services. Now, I know that sometimes professional services can feel like they should be outside of the possibilities of doing things like auctions, but we've seen time and again that you can indeed do it. The key takeaway there is just being very clear on the specification, the service level that you require. So, for example, you don't just go out saying, hey, we need some legal services for our head office. You'd say, look, we need approximately this many hours of this caliber of lawyer to do this specific job that will be measured in this specific way, detailing out those KPIs explicitly, so every bidder is very clear on what they need to do. And if you can do that and achieve that, then by all means you can negotiate hard on it. So in this case, it was for consultancy, management consulting services, and we had some of the big blue chip firms involved. You know who they are, I won't mention their names. And one of them gave us this direct quote via the telephone, just saying, look, we're not widgets, trying to encourage us to kibosh the process. But it worked incredibly well. You know, the bidders all knew what they were there to do and what they were there being judged on providing. And by all means, we've seen it now repeatedly on legal services, consulting services, accountancy services. We've even seen it on procurement training services. So we had some of our partners awkwardly bidding in that, as you know, being put under the screw to bid for procurement training courses for some of our clients. So very much that is a category of spend you can indeed put under this kind of competitive pressure. And the last one that I'll go through before handing over to Adam here is you got to practice what you preach. And in this case, it was a reverse auction for reverse auction software. So not something I should necessarily say that everybody should do, but by all means, we came through the process unscathed, and we were successful, which is nice to see. And again, with ourselves, we really appreciated the opportunity as a bidder for the same reason as those car dealerships, in that it helped us see where we stood, to compete, to react in real time. Whereas, you know, when we sometimes respond to these RFPs or just general, you know, sales meetings with prospects, we can get on really well, we can put forward a really good solution, but it could be months before we hear anything back, if ever. Sometimes, if we don't hear back at all. And there are all sorts of, you know, valid reasons why that happens, but it can be frustrating for us as a bidder just to spend all that time getting to know the requirements and detailing out a proposal to meet those needs, and not to be to hear anything further. And so the auction, it just really helped sort of just crystallize what was required, when it was required, when the decision would be made, and of course gave us that clarity as to where we stood in the market, which was something that was tremendously valuable to us. So yeah, it was very interesting going through that process on the other foot. But it was a very good process to follow, I think. And of course, we have to say that, being a provider ourselves, but genuinely, you know, it was useful. And I know there are many suppliers out there who might try and sidestep the process and say, look, auctions, they're a bad thing, it's just a race to the bottom, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, in our case, having been through that as well, we can say, look, that isn't always the case. It can be very fair, it can be very transparent, and it wasn't a race to the bottom. We knew where we could get to comfortably, and we got to that level, and we stood by that, and we were still successful at the end. So that's probably enough for me at this point in time. Maybe hand over to Adam for a bit of a flow through some case study examples, some things you guys can hopefully learn from.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Nick. So yeah, I mean, one of the great, I guess, anomalies of this environment is the fact that, you know, when you say to people in procurement, you know, what is it actually you do? They may give you 30, 40 different definitions of what that might be, but ultimately it comes down to being responsible for money, being responsible for obviously engaging with the market, understanding, you know, what your scope looks like, and ultimately, you know, bringing in the right services, products, directs, indirects, whatever they may be, for your business. So ultimately, it all does boil down to effectively the same kind of, you know, objective there, and being that, because it is fairly agnostic, there is the ability to apply that logic to a number of different categories, whether you are sitting as a category manager that's looking to purchase some services, or indeed, you know, a director of finance that is really looking at the top level, you know, the multi-million-pound spends across the business. There are ways in which you can approach, you know, not just necessarily going into that full-blown auction, and we've seen that. You know, we have a precedent for that within our solution from our very own customers. So, you know, there's a few interesting graphics I just want to walk through very quickly here on the kind of things we've seen. You know, starting from sort of lifeguards for a hotel facility. I mean, who would ever have thought that this is something you'd do a competitive market tender with? You know, you might typically go out to one or two companies that you know are in the region or in the area, and, you know, simplify it. But actually, if you put that little bit of extra, you know, effort into the process, you can realize some amazing savings. And that's exactly what, you know, this client did on this particular example. So, you know, reaching out to 12 known suppliers in region, resulting in an 18% saving, you know, that was recognized as a result of just driving through that competitive tender, running it as a professional process, making sure that also all the suppliers that were involved, very similarly to Nick's kitchen exercise, had that live market feedback of where they were and being able to, you know, react second bites of the cherry, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it turned out to be a fairly profitable contract for obviously the supplier that won the business. So great. And then moving across to some other interesting, I guess I could cover two in one here with the dried pasta and the canned tomatoes. Things that you literally see on your supermarket shelf. We've seen multiple line item e-auction tenders being run for things as basic as this. You know, maybe more crucial than ever at the moment with all of the sort of, you know, news that's going around with this coronavirus scare and, you know, places being on lockdown. These kind of shelves are going to need to be filled. I always walk around Tesco's yesterday, in fact, and there's just no pasta anywhere. So those reorders must be quite constant for these large supermarket chains. But yeah, you know, we've seen them being run methodically by not only being down to price, but also having that RFI element to it. So there's a level of, you know, qualification of these suppliers that they may not have engaged with before, but they're bringing the opportunity to win some significant, you know, contract here. We're talking about a 1.3 million euro order just for the pasta. But yeah, you know, being able to get that market engagement, defining exactly, I don't know if each line item was a different pasta shape or whatever that might be, but the volumes that they were, and then getting a headline price for what that basket total looked like, and of course achieving, you know, 8.73% on 1.3 million euros is not to be snipped at. And then with, you know, the canned tomatoes, passata, all that kind of stuff, involving 245 suppliers just for that market engagement. I mean, that's phenomenal. You just wouldn't imagine that that kind of thing would, you know, be achieved or even entertained. But the most methodical of procurement people have these tools at hand that can allow them to do this kind of thing. And, you know, as Nick mentioned earlier, being able to manage it on the go as well, without necessarily having to, you know, an influx of detail across, you know, multiple different channels via email or getting phoned all the time. It's there. It can be identified, analyzed side by side, and from there on, you know, regardless of what the category may be, being able to then decide which direction that net leads you in toward is a really, really powerful tool that a procurement person has to hand.
Just to jump in there a sec, Adam. I mean, that's something that I learned, you know, during the consulting days, and you know, here at Market Dojo we have a number of consulting partners that do a similar service, and I'm always amazed at how many suppliers are really out there for particular categories. You think, you know, canned tomatoes and passata and pasta, you know, these retailers know their suppliers, they know their supply chain very well, and for obvious reasons. And if you ask some of the category managers there, or the buyers there, they would give you an honest opinion of saying, look, I only think there's maybe 3 or 4 suppliers out there that can really do what we need. And that's a very fair answer. You know, that's what they've seen. But through the consulting and you know, what some of our partners have done, they genuinely do cast this net incredibly wide. I mean, I remember personally running a plastic injection molding tender for a car seat manufacturer, you know, make child's car seats, and you know, they thought maybe there's 2 or 3 suppliers that really can do our kind of volumes and specification. You know, obviously very high on safety and testing. We went out to 1,500 suppliers, and we shortlisted that down to about 150. We had 150 bespoke quotations from the market. There's a huge market out there, and you know, it just takes a bit of extra work, and that's where things like eSourcing kind of help, because at least it streamlines some of that activity. You don't have 1,500 emails going on. That'll drive you crazy. But you just have 1,500 records in an eSourcing tool to then, you know, centralize all that communication and all of those bids and evaluate those bids, and as Adam says, compare them all side by side. So really, there is a much bigger market out there in most cases than people really let on or have a feel for. So that was a big lesson I learned when going through that consulting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It actually leads into the next topic, or the next category that most recently we've seen that's very interesting and diverse, if you will, is this product certification, if ever there was a testament to testing the market or you know, of defining your supply chain or potential supplier base, well, you know, running this kind of category as a managed service almost through a solution, obviously like ourselves, getting that market engagement by obviously identifying what criteria they can adhere to, making sure that they're scored and classified accordingly. And as a result, you know, you're talking 2,000 bids, over 2,000 bids. You know, it's a competitive market, clearly, for that kind of service across the globe as well. This was for an organization looking to award business in pretty much every corner of the globe. And therefore, the lots were structured accordingly, you know, Argentina, Australia, America, all the way down to the Zeds. And yeah, 2,000 bids. I mean, wow, that's phenomenal. And a huge saving again that's been achieved by just putting that little bit of extra market engagement in place and aligning exactly, you know, what your scope is here. What is it that you need a definition of, weighting it accordingly, and then getting the pricing in. And yeah, it's a really successful indication there of something that may not be bridged or may not be approached even as something that you'd consider. Why would I do that for a solution? You know, I'm quite happy doing it how I do it at the moment. Similarly to things like, you know, corporate rates on the top right hand corner there for things like hotel rooms and hotel rates and also other things that I've not documented there, but car hire and all that kind of thing. We have a lot of organizations that use our solution that are actually tendering for services for their field staff. You know, they've got a lot of satellite offices, they have people that are out in meetings or traveling across the globe a lot. You know, there'll be a significant amount of their spend that will go into things like finding them a bed for the night or feeding them. And so, yeah, you know, we've seen tenders being run for hotel room rates, very similar to the certification service one in terms of being regionalized, reaching out to your Marriotts and your Hiltons and the Holiday Inns or whatever, you know, straightforward, you know, global names, household names, and negotiating a rate and being able to, you know, digest that information across, you know, region by region, be that the EMEAs, the Americas, or indeed, you know, the Asia Pac, and then, you know, being able to drive that spend or define that spend better when it comes to, you know, realizing what was actually saved by putting it through a negotiation platform. That really is another one that's interesting to me. And, you know, seeing additional line items for things like breakfast and airport pickup, you know, what's your Wi-Fi speed like, all that kind of stuff being gathered in one environment. It's just, yeah, it's a testament to just keeping things simple. But yeah, that really blew my mind, that one.
That's a good one. And it's another good one where weightings can come in really effectively for the auction. So you are able to compare your, you know, your Hiltons against your travel lodges.
That's it.
You know, just setting almost setting the supplier a benchmark as to, you know, what costs they would need to offer to encourage the client to go for that extra bit of quality, but automating all of that in the tool itself.
And talking about efficiencies there as well, you know, this was able to be launched across all of these regions, you know, simultaneously. So again, you're doing the exercise times 50, but also at the same time not having to sort of manage that, you know, across something that may take you a month to negotiate, to actually achieve that in a week. So that's a really exciting one. And Nick, I'll pass over to you on this last one, which you probably know a bit more about it than I do, but the pig launcher, when you told me about this, actually, when I came for an interview at Market Dojo, they mentioned about somebody procuring a pig launcher through the system. Launcher.
And you were thinking Angry Birds, right?
I had no idea. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Asphalt for a pig. Yeah. No, it's an oil and gas device, I believe. I'm not an expert, but I believe it's a device that is sent through the pipeline, the pipe network of oil and gas infrastructure, and checks. It does sort of internal inspection of the pipe, looking for any cracks or fractures or anything like that. And it needs a device, a pig launcher that launches this pig.
I see.
So yeah, that was a very, very successful auction there. Huge saving. There often can be in these kind of categories that may not be obvious to people. You know, everyone kind of negotiates hard on stationery. You all know that's a given, a commodity. But some of these more unusual areas can have some really good untapped opportunities. So I think we've got a question that's come in as well. So Hi guys, have you been able to quantify the savings that your platform generates through the streamlined process between buyers and sellers, not just direct category savings? So I presume that that's not saying that the average of 16% saving of baseline cost versus negotiated, the actual process saving itself. It's a really hard one to quantify just because each project can be so different, from your pasta to your hotels to your lifeguards. But we have done some crude approximations previously with various clients that have sort of done this evaluation themselves, and they've worked out that it's roughly a 30% time saving from moving their process from being, the spreadsheets and email into something online. That is an approximation, so I by no means take me as gospel on that for your specific requirements, but if you're looking for something there in a business case as to why to invest in a sort of more online process, then that 30% is something that the previous clients have used for their own assessment. Brilliant. So yeah, moving on, we have category methodologies.
Yeah, methodologies. Yeah, so just sort of looking at the kind of approaches or best ways to approach, these various sort of categories that we've seen ran through the solution, and quite often the kind of questions that we get asked. One of the most common ones that certainly I do working in account management is, have you had an example of somebody? In fact, I was asked this on Friday. Have you had a tender for butter? Have you ever seen a tender for dried fish? Have you ever seen how best to approach a tender for, marketing and PR services? Well, yes, absolutely, we have, funny enough. You've come to the right place. But what we can certainly say here is that we look at how, best to define the scope in terms of what is it you're purchasing. The basic things that, most procurement professionals would certainly know is understanding the liquidity of your market, how defined is the scope. Are there only certain suppliers in the globe even that might be able to provide this particular piece of equipment? Very frequent in things like oil and gas and pharmaceutical, for example. But then also looking at, okay, well, whilst those things might give me a little bit of a limitation in what I can do in terms of who I go to, it doesn't necessarily stop you from managing the approach in a particular way to make your life easier. So we've come up with a few category methodologies here that we've seen, or we've recommended our approach, based on those parameters of what your spend looks like. Are we going out to 300 suppliers here, or maybe we could even help bolster those supplier numbers that you may not have recognized yet. So I'll just whiz through the first one being that sort of two-stage approach. So if you need to, gather thousands of bespoke quotes, things that we quite often see with the direct spend with machine parts. One of our clients, in fact, that did just this, machine parts on their production line. There was an unbelievable list of line items that were multiple quantities. I think it was upwards of $50 million of spend. But yeah, putting that through a sourcing platform might perhaps not encourage suppliers to, well, indeed, doing it on Excel in the first place might not indeed encourage suppliers to want to sit there and start putting their pricing in for unit prices or unit items of a penny a unit, so to speak. But yeah, so the two-stage approach. So why don't we look at gathering that basket total, be that offline or indeed through that as an RFI initially. That mass Excel sheet that you can get the baseline for all of these items. And then the second stage being that once that information has been gathered and you've kind of got that benchmarking for the top items or the higher spend items, almost like a Pareto rule, if you will, you then would consolidate that basket into a nice simple high line basket total of the specific the categories or the items within those subcategories that quantified 80% of that spend. And therefore, not running necessarily another round of negotiation on the things that really aren't the high priority or the necessarily the more expensive items, but where you can manage to realize some margin with the ones that there is actually a higher order per, we're talking about higher volume in orders, or a baseline cost of 6 figures or 7 even, that could then be used as part of that negotiation process. So almost just cutting your shopping list in half, understanding that initial stage of what that quantity looks like and the value and the spend there, but then going to that next stage, be that a multi-stage RFQ or indeed running it through an auction, the auction process, being that your market liquidity or supply liquidity could be quite tasty, and just realizing that potential by breaking it down into two pieces. And we've seen that approach adopted on a number of occasions. One that springs to mind most recently was actually on uniform, uniform for employees, basically, and split across multiple categories, multiple line items, multiple regions. It was regionalized by continent, etc. And gathering that baseline pricing and then going to the next stage of the tender with the sourcing platform to really squeeze that margin.
And that's also, I've seen it work really well in that stage one, taking that Pareto, as you say, and folks taking that to the mass market and then getting those quotes back, so that those suppliers, they only have to quote for maybe 100 parts, even though your overall requirement is several thousand. And once those quotes are back, you can shortlist down to say just your top 2 or 3 suppliers. Maybe you do that via an auction process, or maybe you do it through a more traditional process. But you come up with your shortlist of 2 or 3 suppliers, and only those 2 or 3 do you need to give the tail, the rest of the parts out to for them to quote up, because you through stage one you've already identified who are the best suppliers out there, the most competitive suppliers. You've still got 2 or 3 involved in the process, so they know that they can't just massively hike up the prices of the tail spend, because there's still a contract to be won at the end of this. So they still have to be competitive, but it means that you only need a few suppliers to do that last bit of quoting across thousands of parts. Because the alternative, what we've seen often before, is a client will come to us going, here's 5,000 parts we need to buy, can we just go out and get quotes for all of these? And the question we always ask is, do you need all these quotes back at the same time? Because do that Pareto, you'll save yourself a ton of work, and just get 2 or 3 final sort of vetted and competitive suppliers to do all of the items. So that was a good tip. I suppose number 2, corner basket, you've kind of talked about it.
Yeah, a little bit more. Yeah, and again, that we see a lot with certainly catalogued items with things like office supplies and electronic components. But yeah, very similar approach. But it is very much about just, if you can, and there's certainly, feel free to reach out to us if ever you want some consultancy or advice on what we've seen as an approach here, by the way. Feel free to reach out. But yeah, if you can consolidate that to being a top line that might be split across a few simple lots, or indeed just, look, I just want a headline price for this entire basket total. We know what it looks like on the sheet. We know what all of this catalogued, struggling to say that word, catalogued items look like. But yeah, we just want a tender on what that out and out cost looks like. And then you can even split that across, saying, well, actually, we'll get a cost for, what if we commit to you for year 1? Well, what if we commit to you for year 2? And what if we commit to you for year 3? And again, just aggregating, those quotes that you might receive. Rate card approach. Nick, rate card approach. Talk to me about rate card approach.
Rate card approach. So yeah, this is where you might have quite a challenging category, maybe more service-based. So we've seen things like engineering services, installation, construction, that kind of thing, where ultimately it's a lot of labor and a lot of different types of skilled labor that go into the costs. And so in this model, you can, rather than having a sort of specific line item for each thing that you say, I need this many hours of this type of electrician, instead you just set yourself the rate card. So you say, look, overall we spend £1 million a year on our electrician. What's the kind of day rate, out of hours cost, that kind of thing for that particular service. And you'd have potentially thousands of these things. So you could have a really complex rate card. And sometimes, these rate cards are actually aggregates of different services. So you'd say, like, rate card service number 1 is actually where we need 10 electricians, a plumber, a builder, a carpenter, and a roofer, because that entire package is a piece of work to do a fit out of a new building. And so the rate card is like, right, new building, what's the rate? But underneath that is all of that itemized sort of bill of materials almost of how it's derived. And in this case, again, instead of going out and negotiating on every single individual service and saying, what's your rate for an electrician going to be, what's your rate for a plumber going to be. Instead, you can take that existing rate card and the existing rates that you get from your current suppliers, and you can do a Japanese auction on it. And in that Japanese auction, your incumbents, your suppliers, are basically committing to what kind of percentage discount they can offer against the rate card as a whole. Now, you could break it down into elements, so it could be electricians or electrical services, building services, and sort of negotiate on a sub level like that. But really, that's the idea. Let suppliers start at whatever kind of level they want to, whatever their kind of today's rate might be, and then just negotiate the percentage discount that they're going to take off from that for your requirements. We've seen it with temporary labor work very well in that way as well, just doing a Japanese auction on reducing the margin percentage that an agency would charge out, or consultancy. So that's a really elegant way of doing it, because you don't need to muddle around with all the line items. You're just saying, well, look, suppliers, you start off with what you've already got, and then just through this auction process, you're going to give us a discount from that. And then once the auction's all finished, you can sort of do that maths on the individual suppliers' rate cards as to where they ended up with their discount, to see that what you're going to be charged contractually for any of those individual line items. So that's quite an elegant way of doing it, and simplifies the process. So
cool.
Yeah,
interesting. And so trial and negotiation approach are probably most involved or most similar, should I say, to the services we offer as a SaaS provider. Interesting one here, because absolutely, service levels may not be completely defined or fully understood across those solutions that may be out there, but that it's not necessarily going to be a high level of spend. Again, dependent on what particular service, software, or whatever it may be that you're tendering for. But one thing that we have seen is where this kind of category is being ran is that trial period, and then negotiation ahead of actually deciding whether or not they need to re-engage with the market, or revisit this in a few months' time or whatever. There's nothing stopping you from trialing. They're going back to just what Market Dojo is and what we stand for in terms of the offering we have. We are here to help you manage and negotiate with suppliers. There is nothing that makes you do whatever you don't want to do, or commit to a specific supplier or anything like that. You are free to trial and understand and engage and dip your toe in the water, if you will, with the market, to then see where that puts you, where maybe that's looking like in 3 years' time if we're looking at a mass implementation, etc. So the trial and negotiate approach is a really interesting one, in that I've actually seen being able to do that sort of first stage engagement with the market. So understanding, tell us everything about you. What can you offer us? We don't really know what we want, but you tell us what you can offer us. We know that this is kind of what we do at the minute, and maybe you might be able to help with this element, etc., etc. So there will be that market engagement and receiving a proposal or even a brochure of what those services look like, and then taking away from there to say, okay, right, let's ask a few more questions about this. We've been interested in maybe not all of it, but there's elements that we're interested in. And then from that, typically there may be some sort of demonstration. It's something obviously that we're used to at Market Dojo. We very often will demonstrate our solution, and we obviously encourage the fact that you can self-service demonstrate yourself if you want to as well. But with this approach, perhaps there is an element of gathering your stakeholders that might be end users, that might be sponsors of this particular purchase, that want to know exactly what it is that you're asking them for budget for, to be involved in that process. And it's not uncommon to see those kind of not only proposals, not commercially, but proposals in terms of what the offering looks like, and then actually the demonstration to be weighted and scored, across the people that have been involved in that visibility. So you told me an interesting story actually, Nick, once about how internally there was some weighting and scoring on the stakeholders that are involved. So the more senior person might have the bigger say than the end user ultimately, that is somebody that they're obviously going to give the reins to. But that's another approach, is a really interesting one. At this point, we've not even talked about commercials, but just understanding, we're not too sure what we need or what it is that we're looking at here, but we've got a process that doesn't work, or there's a hole in our business that's really struggling. It's laborious, it's costing us. And going back to the question received earlier, we know it's costing us loads of time. We're having to hire more and more people to help manage this service, and going out to the market with, these are our problems, can you tell us what you've got on offer that could be a solution to that? And then, yeah, you know, that trial stage and understanding, you know, a visibility of what that may look like, and being able to wait and score that before, like I say, deciding, well, okay, now we can go into a commercial negotiation, or, you know, we'll park that for now and we'll revisit in 6-9 months. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good one. You could use it on things like freight. You can trial a freight provider for a bit. You know, software providers, of course, anything with low implementation, but you can just trial it for a little bit and see through that whether they qualify or not. And then the last one, yeah, the best fit approach. Just conscious of time, we're going to be quite quickly get through the rest of it. We've only got a couple of things to say. But yeah, the best fit approach, things like CapEx. So this is really where you're flipping, you know, the process on its head. You're not saying this is what we want, give us a cost. Just where actually you don't know at all really what you want. You just say you know what the solution you're trying to solve is. Like, you know, we need a new piece of machinery to, you know, do some printing or do some packaging, or we've had one recently, we need a new MRI scanner for a hospital. Okay. You know, and the services and the products that the different suppliers are offering are completely different. You know, you can't sort of evaluate them in the same kind of way. So you just have to come up with that balanced scorecard. Say, well, this is the solution we're looking for. You know, it's got to do this many scans per minute to this level of quality. You know, it's got to be easy to use for our team. And you can then just basically build your proposal to match up to that kind of evaluation, that sort of balanced scorecard approach. So that can be, you know, quite an effective way of doing things as well. And you can, again, auction that as well once you're happy that all of those solutions meet your needs. Then it's just down to the cost negotiation. Brilliant. So I hope that's helpful there. Yeah, a few other things.
Yeah, so just sort of as we tail off to the end here, we've got a really wonderful resource that we keep open to the public on our website. This is known as our category hub. So there's a small you can work your way through to the website. On the drop down, there's a small overview of typical categories that we've seen run through our solution. You can click into that, find some more information about typically what the market engagement looked like, average, you know, percent of savings that have been realised. That obviously, you know, we have a loose figure of from the years of running these kind of tenders for our platform. And yeah, it's just a wonderful resource to just open your eyes up to the kind of things that you might think are restricted by this kind of process and just dismiss the fact that it could even become a reality. Well, jump on, have a look, see what you think. You know, there's some really interesting categories there. Obviously, some of the most, you know, obvious ones that you would expect to see, but some also not so. And that's always growing as well. You know, the more and more examples we have of these interesting things, you know, ran through Market Dojo, the more information that we will have. It really is our end users that drive this, so it's great to see.
Cool. So there's another quick poll for those of you still with us. I hope there are many of you out there.
So let's go back to the early question.
Are there any categories you feel wouldn't work and why? So this is more the other way around now. What you think wouldn't work and why you think it wouldn't work. Put us to the test. See if there's anything you can stump us on. Because trust us, we've seen a lot.
There is an interesting question just got there. So what categories would you suggest looking at first if we were to consider auctions and want to prove the value in the lowest risk way? Great question. Well, firstly, it certainly depends on what categories you're responsible for. But yeah, you know, the common ones, obviously, that we're certainly familiar with, and I'm sure that you may have been involved in you know, various organisations that you've worked for before, would be things like, you know, IT hardware, you know, office supplies, like marketing services, all of these kind of things where there's quite a high supplier base for that. But also, yeah, you know, going back to some of the things we saw earlier with the directs, you know, even consumables, food items. You know, how many suppliers of that are there of rice around the world? Those kind of things are also ones that spring to mind. I don't know if you can think of any others as well, Nick.
No, that's it. Most of these sort of general, yeah, office maintenance kind of categories are pretty good for that. They're fairly commoditized and pretty low risk. They can be quite effective for this way of working. So yeah, I'll start with those really.
Cool. And then going back to the earlier answers we received, so what was that? A couple of examples there of Some interesting ones. So what was that? Bulletproof glass.
Bulletproof glass was an interesting one that
Wow.
someone's done.
Yeah, and e-signature software. Yeah, again, so that goes back to the one that the sort of approach we were talking about earlier on about implementing a solution. We know we've got a problem with managing contracts and, you know, being able to author and pass that around the legal team and the quality team, and but we don't really know what's out there in the market. You know, we know there might be some e-signatures, you know, software to help with us. So yeah, you know, that kind of approach might follow that typical sort of, you know, obtuse category, if you will, and also certainly bulletproof glass. I mean, that's crazy, right? People tendering for bulletproof glass, but then I guess, you know, people need to buy that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's a market out there for sure to find. And we've seen, yeah, meat and sports facilities are a couple of others that we've had. Meat is an interesting one. We see that every now and then. 150 euros worth of meat.
Yeah, absolutely. And sports facilities, yeah, interesting actually, yeah, because I don't know, there was a character on Dragon's Den actually that was pitching about, he was trying to get investment for this whole plan of subletting of 3G pitches for this football enterprise that he wanted to set up, and obviously give them a cut of it. So something like that would have been an interesting tender that I'm sure he would have had to get the market engagement for. You know, being able to say, yeah, we've got a plot all over, you know, the UK or across London or wherever they may have been. I don't remember specifically, but yeah, interesting one. Sports facilities, and something actually that we've talked to a little bit actually in the public sector about with schools, universities, local councils as well. So yeah, interesting you mentioned that. We have seen that kind of thing running through the solution.
Brilliant. We've just got a couple of slides to finish off, and then there is Q&A at the end. We've kind of gone through Q&A as we've gone through, so that we can probably cut short on. But yeah, last couple of slides are just saying that, you know, auctions, they aren't just price focused. I know people have said that, and I know that blue chip firm in the consulting auction said that, but you know, the auction is just that final negotiation at the end. By that point, you should at least have a good understanding of, you know, the supplier is capable, that they pass the quality criteria, that they can offer a good solution. And so really the only unknown variable in there is the final price, and that's what the auction is there to do. So, you know, that's one key point. You can use the weightings, the auction weightings. So as we said in those examples with like the car, or you know, what other ones we have the weighting for? I mean, obviously public sector auctions, Dojo auctions.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can do that combination of quality and price.
Yeah, and a lot of the sort of managed services like HR and PR, especially PR is a big one where the proposals are put across the, like I said, quite often even a brochure, a catalogue of what they can do. But yeah, you would certainly, you know, look at weighting and scoring and sharing. You know, we're engaging with the wider stakeholder team to get their feedback on from as well.
Get that buy-in.
Yeah,
absolutely. So there you go. And then the last one was, yeah, how to get more participation in auctions. So yeah, as we've said today, we've been there on the bidder side for reverse auction software. So we know the process very well. We've obviously engaged with hundreds of suppliers every single day through our customer service team. So, I mean, the first thing to spell out to suppliers is it's a genuine opportunity. You know, like I say, if you're taking part as a supplier in an RFP, months can go by, you don't hear any feedback, and then you might hear that dreaded "Dear John" email of, you know, thank you for taking part on this occasion, you're not successful. And you kind of look at yourself and think, what could we have done differently? You know, where did we fall down on this? This is where auctions can really give you that benefit as a supplier. So no, this is a genuine opportunity. We're putting it out there in the market, and you will hear back. And you know, that in itself makes the process more efficient. It's online, everything's there, deadlines are quite clear, and they're usually held to them. Rather than most RFPs we've responded in, I think the deadlines have moved quite often. Yeah. But when they're running the tool, they are more often than not fixed. They don't change. So it does make the process more efficient. You've got that potential for future involvement. So, you know, whilst you may, as a supplier, you may not win on this specific occasion, the door is now open for different opportunities with that same client. So we'd never like to turn down any opportunities. We just want to help build that relationship, because you never know what might come around the corner in future. People move jobs, that kind of thing, and it's good to build that relationship. And then the upsell. So, you know, as I say, once you've got that foot in the door, then there are usually opportunities for the supplier to do more. So whilst that auction might be on a particular specific requirement, prove yourself competitive and capable, and who knows, there may be other requirements from the new product development team or otherwise that come around the door that supplier has got themselves in prime position for, and that may actually not even go to auction the second time round. And then lastly, you know, what we found ourselves, it was transparent and it was instant. So it just really helped out us as a bidder. And you know, that's the feedback we get from a lot of suppliers here, because we do survey the suppliers after every single event to hear their thoughts. And we have a net positive score from suppliers that, you know, they do appreciate the process.
It's also not unheard of for suppliers that have been involved in a tender using Market Dojo to actually contact us about using it themselves further down the supply chain, because obviously they will have their own purchasing team. They've had this exposure to, you know, how simple it was to take part, you know, getting that live feedback from the market and thinking about, well, maybe we could flip that on the head and do that ourselves from our purchasing team. So yeah, you know, we're very proud of the fact that there is that complete transparency across the board, and being able to just move things forward a lot more efficiently. I think the main goal from both parties with these kind of things, buyers and suppliers, is just getting things delivered on time, and making it nice and easy to sort of, you know, give a knot to it on the bow, if you will.
Brilliant. Well, the last thing was any Q&A. Now, we have been going through, so I don't expect many Q&A. There are a couple of other things just we can quickly address on this. So we've had a question here saying, we mentioned temporary workforce earlier. How do we find, you know, are there many auctions in this area, such as recruitment? Yeah, it's a very popular area, actually. It's a very commoditized service, you know, taking the workers out of it, you know, just the service of finding temporary labor and applying margins on top of it. It can be very clearly defined, the type of service that's required. So yeah, it's very popular, and that auctioning the margin of these agencies is what people focus on, and can do it very effectively.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of agencies out there. That's the other good thing.
There's one final one here on branding, tendering branded goods. Yeah, that's a great question. We do see that a lot. And yeah, absolutely. So if you are drilling down into specific, you know, items that you might want to purchase, that you know obviously have a certain quality or adhere to a certain quality because of their brand, absolutely. But that doesn't, you know, necessarily mean that suppliers aren't able to take part in the tender, because there is the ability to allow them to offer alternative. So almost a sort of a like for like or best option. Think about it in your real life world, and I know that they get this very wrong a lot of the time, but where you get your supermarket delivery, and you've asked for, I don't know, a bag of lettuce, and they didn't have any on the shelf, so they've given you, you know, the problem here is you don't usually have a say, but they end up returning I don't know, a bag of spring greens or something instead. But yeah, going off a tangent there, but yeah, absolutely. So yeah, branded items is a very interesting one. Being able to just allow suppliers that might not be able to cater for that specific, you know, item part, sorry, or whatever that may be. But yeah, this is our alternative, and our unit price for that actually is, you know, a slightly better margin, or actually it turns out that the only offering they can, you know, give you compared to your preferred brand is out of your budget. So yeah, you know, being able to do that's really great.
And to add to that, what we've seen is we've had people auction iPads before. For this is for a holiday airline. And they have iPads in the first class department for their passengers. Now it's an iPad. I mean, you know, it's as branded as they come, but it depends who you're buying it from. You know, if you're of the kind of volume you can buy direct from Apple, then fair enough. But often the spend isn't large enough. You know, Apple will push you through their distributors and wholesalers. And in those cases, there are a lot of them. And these distributors sometimes have their own flexibility as to what margins to apply. So you can, in fact, then get a competitive market. You can bring these distributors and auction between them to provide that requirement to you. And I do remember one example, this is a while back now, where we did have enough of a volume that Apple themselves wanted to bid, as well as all the distributors. And the distributors actually outbid Apple. because Apple had their margins that they wanted to work towards, and they were pretty rigid with those. But the distributors were happy to, in some cases, go below cost because they knew that there were extra services that their client would then buy from them as a result. For example, replacement of damaged goods, or future upsell of buying more of these products, and cross-selling other items that the distributor offered from them, because they'd already proven themselves to be a very preferred supplier. So soon those iPads turn into, actually, can you supply us with a couple of keyboards, and what about some mice, and what about one of these Jabra headsets? And before you know it, that distributor's making loads of margin on all these other items, auxiliary items. And so you can still get a very competitive market. For things like Mars bars that was in that question, that's a bit more difficult. We've had things like petrol station forecourt companies use the auctions with us on things like Coca-Cola, where it's came down to more of a question, rather than what you're buying, it's what are you wanting to sell? Are you looking to sell Coca-Cola, in which case you've got one supplier really who can do that? Or are you looking to sell, fizzy sugared drink that's going to, taste nice and hydrate people? In which case, you've got alternatives. You've got Coca-Cola, you've got Pepsi, you've got, some of these other brands that are out there. And then you've got yourself a competitive marketplace. And so maybe with the Mars bar example, you can say, are you specifically trying to sell Mars bars, or are you trying to sell some kind of chocolate, toffee, confectionery item? In which case, I don't know the market so well, whether Snickers and Mars bars are all on the same roof, but you can start creating a competitive environment by having that space on the shelf that, in essence, that's what you're auctioning, not the item itself. So hopefully that helps answer that one. Cool. So I'm pretty much sure we're out of time now. That's about an hour on the dot. Yeah. I don't think there are any other questions that have come in, but from us too, thank you everybody for listening. I hope that was interesting. Few takeaways there. This stuff will be shared on our website in the coming days once it's been sort of cleaned up. And the category hub there on our website, please do have a look at that. There's some useful sort of category guidance there. The periodic chart that we showed at the beginning is available on the website, or through the tool itself. Actually, there's a handout there. So please do have a look at those handouts. And if anything comes up, just give us a call, give us an email. We'd love to hear from you. So I hope that was useful. So it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me too. Thank you very much, guys, and I hope you found that a very fun, engaging session. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.